The atmosphere in the White House briefing room was tense as Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt approached the podium. At just 27 years old, Leavitt had already made history as the youngest person to hold this position, a fact that added to the anticipation surrounding her briefings. However, her recent press conference would soon be remembered not for her age or historic appointment, but for its immediate and dramatic impact on the financial markets. As Leavitt began to speak, she confidently addressed the administration's economic policies, asserting that President Trump's strategies were ushering in a golden age for American manufacturing. She emphasized the administration's commitment to America First trade policies, highlighting recent tariff implementations aimed at protecting domestic industries. Leavitt stated, "President Trump is implementing the formula that we know works, transitioning from the economic nightmare under the previous administration to a period of prosperity." However, as she spoke, financial news networks displayed real-time stock tickers that told a different story. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was plummeting, with a drop exceeding 700 points during the briefing. This stark contrast between Leavitt's optimistic rhetoric and the market's reaction was not lost on viewers. The Independent reported that while Leavitt boasted about the administration's economic achievements, the Dow Jones Index was experiencing significant losses, reflecting investor concerns over the escalating trade tensions and the potential for a recession. When questioned about the market's downturn, Leavitt dismissed the concerns, labeling the fluctuations as a snapshot in time and attributing them to the previous administration's policies. She maintained that the current administration was focused on long-term economic growth and that short-term market reactions were not indicative of the overall economic trajectory. Despite her reassurances, the press conference had immediate repercussions. Analysts and commentators criticized the administration's approach, pointing to the market's volatility as evidence of investor unease. The press briefing, intended to bolster confidence in the administration's economic policies, instead highlighted the disconnect between official statements and market realities. This press conference marked a pivotal moment, raising questions about the administration's handling of economic policy and communication. As the markets continued to react, the implications of Leavitt's statements and the administration's strategies would be scrutinized in the days to come. As the press conference continued, it became clear that Leavitt was struggling to maintain control of the narrative. Reporters pressed her on the sudden plunge in stock values, on the panicked tone emerging from Wall Street, and on whether the White House had considered the consequences of its trade policies before rolling them out. Her responses, though polished on the surface, lacked depth, and worse, appeared disconnected from the unfolding economic reality. One particularly tense exchange came when a Bloomberg correspondent asked, "Are you suggesting this market crash is a good sign? Because right now, billions are being wiped off portfolios while you claim we're in a manufacturing renaissance." Leavitt replied, "The markets react emotionally. The president governs with facts. We are finally holding our trade partners accountable after decades of exploitation." That quote would be replayed throughout the day across media outlets, accompanied by headlines like, "Trump White House blames emotional markets as stocks crash," and "Markets in freefall" during Leavitt's first press conference. The disconnect was stark. While Leavitt projected confidence and strength, the numbers on the screens behind her continued bleeding red. Adding fuel to the fire, Leavitt pivoted mid-conference to defend the president's recent remarks, suggesting that the Federal Reserve should consider freezing all interest rate activity until the trade war stabilizes. Her tone grew defiant. This president won't be bullied by Wall Street or the Fed. He's looking out for the American worker, not hedge funds. This moment, while clearly intended to reinforce Trump's image as a populist warrior, had the opposite effect on global markets. Traders in London and Frankfurt began pulling back. Asian markets, just hours from opening, braced for a wave of panic selling. Within the room, the energy had shifted. What began as a standard White House update had morphed into a full-blown crisis communication disaster. Meanwhile, clips from the briefing began going viral. In one widely shared video, Leavitt, visibly flustered, paused mid-answer as a reporter shouted over her, "Can the administration even control this market anymore?" She froze for a moment before regaining composure, but the damage was already done. Behind the scenes, according to leaked messages reported by Politico, senior Trump advisors were scrambling to do damage control. reaching out to financial networks and key Wall Street analysts to clarify Levitt's statements. But the effort seemed too little, too late. By the time the press conference ended, the Dow had fallen nearly 950 points. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq were also deep in the red. The headline from CNN's live ticker read bluntly, "Markets collapse during Trump press briefing." What unfolded in the hours after Caroline Leavitt left the podium was nothing short of a political and economic earthquake. The White House had clearly underestimated both the sensitivity of the markets and the intensity of public scrutiny. Analysts were now calling the press conference one of the most catastrophic communications failures in recent presidential history. Cable news ran split screens. On one side, footage of Leavitt's composed delivery. On the other, live graphs of the market in freefall. Headlines used words like collapse, chaos, and crisis. Even conservative media outlets, typically aligned with the administration, aired segments questioning the wisdom of allowing an untested spokesperson to front such a high-stakes moment. In a scathing editorial, the Wall Street Journal wrote, "Confidence is the currency of economic stability." Today, that currency was spent recklessly. They accused the administration of provoking avoidable panic through poor messaging and a failure to offer any concrete policy reassurances. Instead of calming fears, the White House had poured gasoline on them. Meanwhile, investors weren't the only ones reacting with alarm. Inside Washington, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle expressed concern. A Republican senator, speaking anonymously, told reporters, "I support the president's trade goals, but this looked like we were winging it during a house fire." A Democratic representative went further, tweeting, "This is what happens when you confuse defiance with leadership. The country deserves better than this level of amateur hour." By mid-afternoon, the Treasury Department had been forced to issue a rare public clarification. In a short, two-paragraph statement, it reaffirmed the independence of the Federal Reserve and denied any plans to interfere with monetary policy, an indirect rebuttal to Leavitt's earlier comments. It was a clear sign that multiple branches of the administration were no longer on the same page. Social media exploded. The #sign disaster presser began trending globally. One clip in particular, where Leavitt stumbles over a question about international bondholders, racked up 4.2 million views in a matter of hours. "She didn't just tank the markets," one tweet read. "She nuked investor confidence on live television." Still, the most alarming fallout wasn't just the markets or the memes. It was the sense that this wasn't a fluke, but a symptom of an administration so focused on projecting strength that it failed to see the value of precision, preparation, and strategy. Leavitt had been chosen for her loyalty, but today's press conference raised the question, at what cost? As evening approached, the White House attempted to regain control of the narrative, but the damage was already deep and spreading. In a surprise late-afternoon appearance on Fox Business, economic advisor Stephen Moore tried to walk back some of Leavitt's more inflammatory remarks. "Look, the markets are volatile," he said, "but the fundamentals are strong, and we're confident that the president's policies are setting us up for long-term success." His tone was calm, measured, everything Leavitt's delivery had not been. But the markets weren't listening. The Dow closed with a staggering 978-point loss, one of the worst single-day drops of the year. Foreign exchange markets reeled as the dollar weakened against both the euro and the yuan. Gold surged. Oil futures dipped sharply. It was clear. Investors were bracing for uncertainty. Meanwhile, within Trump's inner circle, finger-pointing had begun. Multiple sources inside the administration leaked that Caroline Leavitt had gone off-script at several key moments during the briefing. One senior staffer told Axios, she was supposed to read prepared remarks and take 2 pre-screened questions. Instead, she improvised and said things we never approved. The source added that Trump, who had been watching the briefing live from the West Wing, was furious. The press corps, sensing blood, pounced. Late-night news shows devoted entire segments to the collapse, replaying Leavitt's awkward responses, split-screened with live reactions from traders on the New York Stock Exchange floor. Some journalists openly questioned whether she would survive the week in her role. Others speculated that Trump might use her as a scapegoat, distancing himself from the fallout even though her talking points had clearly been drawn from his own rhetoric. But the story didn't stop at Levitt's stumble. The real alarm, as economists warned, was that the briefing had exposed deep fractures in the administration's messaging. Fractures that could have long-term implications. This wasn't just a communications failure, said Harvard economist Danielle Woodbury during a PBS interview. It was a glimpse into a White House that is increasingly improvising economic policy in real time, with no coherent strategy or internal coordination. And then came the real shock: foreign response. Within hours, China's Ministry of Commerce released a statement condemning what it called reckless economic threats and misinformation. They warned that if the U.S. continued to manipulate markets through hostile press briefings, retaliatory action would follow. That threat alone was enough to send futures markets tumbling even further after hours. The press conference that began as a standard update had spiraled into a global flashpoint. And as the night fell over Washington, the lights in the West Wing stayed on much later than usual. By nightfall, the consequences of the disastrous press conference had spread far beyond the White House gates. Markets were still shaking from the impact, and international headlines were filled with phrases like economic shockwave, White House meltdown, and Trump's press secretary torpedoes investor confidence. Yet perhaps the most troubling development was not economic, but geopolitical. In a highly unusual move, European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde issued a carefully worded statement emphasizing the importance of predictable U.S. policy signals for maintaining global financial stability. While her tone remained diplomatic, the implication was clear. The White House had just sent tremors through the global economy, and allies were now openly concerned. Even more alarming was the emergency meeting called by the Bank of Japan. Overnight trading in Tokyo saw the Nikkei plummet by more than 2.3%, with analysts citing policy incoherence from Washington as a primary driver. South Korean and Australian markets followed suit. The fallout was no longer confined to Wall Street. It was now a global contagion. Back home, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers appeared on MSNBC with a blunt warning. This administration is playing with fire. When financial credibility collapses, it doesn't happen gradually. It happens all at once. He criticized both the content and tone of Levitt's statements, noting that even the appearance of political influence over the Fed could spark long-term damage to the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. Meanwhile, Trump remained silent. There was no late-night tweet storm, no follow-up appearance on friendly media outlets, just a rare and telling void. Inside the West Wing, sources said the president was seething, blaming advisors for not properly preparing Leavitt and demanding answers as to why markets reacted so violently. Yet at no point did he take public responsibility, nor did he offer any clarification to calm investors. Instead, it was Caroline Leavitt herself who returned to the press room just before 9 p.m. to issue a brief 94-second follow-up statement. Her tone was subdued, almost robotic. The administration is monitoring financial developments closely. The president remains committed to strengthening the American economy, protecting American workers, and defending U.S. interests abroad. We urge calm and patience as we move through this period of transition. No questions were taken. No apology was offered. And for many watching, the statement only deepened the sense that the White House had no clear plan. That night, CNN's Chiron read, "Markets crash, allies rattle, Trump admin silent." But the bigger question now wasn't what had just happened. It was what would happen next. Would the administration double down, reverse course, or allow the economic turbulence to spiral unchecked? By the next morning, the storm had only intensified. U.S. markets opened with sharp losses as investors digested the aftershocks of Caroline Leavitt's press conference and the administration's radio silence. The Dow plunged another 400 points within the first hour of trading. Treasury yields dropped as investors fled to safe havens. Meanwhile, the phrase "Levitt crash" had entered the financial lexicon, trending not only on social media but on Bloomberg and CNBC as analysts scrambled to quantify the damage. At the White House, the mood was described by insiders as full lockdown mode. Staffers avoided reporters in the hallways. National Economic Council officials were summoned for an emergency huddle. Behind closed doors, sources revealed a rift forming between the communications team and Trump's top economic advisors. Some blamed Leavitt for going off script. Others blamed the speechwriters. A few, quietly, blamed Trump himself. The administration had expected a bounce in public confidence, a rally around the flag effect from what was supposed to be a bold restatement of Trump's economic doctrine. Instead, they triggered a mini-crisis that drew condemnation from allies, chaos in the markets, and whispers about leadership competence at the highest levels of power. By midday, Treasury Secretary Mark Short appeared at a hastily arranged press event outside the Eisenhower Executive Office building. "We want to make it clear," he said, "that U.S. fiscal and monetary policy remains stable, focused, and grounded in long-term fundamentals. The president has no intention of interfering with the Federal Reserve's independence." The statement was clearly designed to clean up Leavitt's earlier remarks, but it came far too late to contain the narrative. News anchors were already airing montages comparing Leavitt's briefing with past press disasters, likening it to the infamous moments from the Nixon and Carter eras. Several financial publications openly speculated that the administration's economic credibility might now be permanently damaged. Across the globe, China announced that it would suspend trade negotiations scheduled for the following week. A spokesperson for Beijing's Ministry of Foreign Affairs accused the Trump administration of weaponizing market uncertainty as a tool of negotiation. A sharp escalation in rhetoric that hinted at a deeper diplomatic breakdown. The yuan fell. Global shipping futures froze. Traders in Singapore and Hong Kong were advised to brace for another wave of volatility. And then came the headlines that stung the White House the most. Trump's team broke the market and doesn't know how to fix it. America first, strategy last. Leavitt's debut ends in freefall. Behind the scenes, senior campaign advisors reportedly begged the president to consider reshuffling his comms team. Some even floated the idea of a temporary economic czar to stabilize confidence. But Trump, ever defiant, refused to concede failure. According to one aide, he insisted, "The markets are soft. They'll come back. People just need to stop panicking." Unfortunately, that reassurance never made it to the trading floor. As the dust began to settle, it was clear that the damage wasn't just economic, it was psychological. Investors had lost confidence, allies had grown wary, and inside the country, many were beginning to ask a far more serious question: who's actually steering the ship? Caroline Leavitt's press conference will likely be studied for years, not as a bold reassertion of policy strength, but as a textbook case in how fragile global markets have become, and how words, when poorly chosen, can ricochet across continents in seconds. Her attempt to project control had inadvertently revealed just how volatile and reactive the system truly is. The administration has since attempted to downplay the incident, insisting that the fundamentals remain strong and that America's economic trajectory is unshaken. But markets, foreign governments, and a growing number of domestic voices aren't convinced. Confidence, once lost, is hard to win back. What comes next is anyone's guess. Will the White House pivot, learn, and recalibrate its messaging? Or will it double down, risking further volatility in the name of political defiance? We'll be watching every step of the way. But now we want to hear from you.